The chamber was cold, metallic, and suffocating. Chains dragged across the floor with every movement of the massive creatures bound inside. Their wings, torn and frayed, scraped against the walls. Scales that once shimmered like molten gold were cracked, stained, and lifeless in parts. These were no ordinary beasts. They were dragon-class creatures, apex predators feared across countless star systems. Yet here they lay, broken and humiliated. In the corner, unnoticed, a human stood. He was small, frail, unarmed. Dirt and sweat smeared his face. His clothes hung in tatters, but his eyes were wide, alert. He had been left behind by the soldiers, considered irrelevant. A whisper of a human among monsters was what they thought he was, an unimportant shadow. He swallowed, his throat dry. "They are dying," he murmured to himself, his voice trembling. He stepped a little closer, unsure if fear or fascination drove him. The dragon's breathing was slow, uneven, but then something happened. Their eyes, glowing faintly in the dim chamber, shifted. They looked at him. A chill ran down his spine. He froze, staring back. Could they see him? Could they know him? He had only heard stories of dragons choosing their enemies, or their masters, but he had never imagined he would be the one to witness it. "You should not be here," he whispered again, though he knew no one would answer. Chains rattled as the dragons shifted slightly. One of them lifted its massive head. The human noticed how careful it was, how its movements were precise despite the obvious pain. The creature's golden eyes fixed on him, unblinking. A faint growl emerged, low and measured. It wasn't anger. It was a question. The human's pulse raced. He raised his hands slowly, palms open. I won't hurt you," he said, barely more than a breath. The room seemed to hold its own breath in response. From outside the chamber, voices echoed, shouts, orders, the clanging of weapons. But the dragons did not react to the sounds. Their focus was on him alone. The human's heart thundered. "Why me?" he whispered, almost to himself. He stepped a little closer, each movement deliberate, careful not to startle them. The larger of the two dragons shifted, wings scraping against the wall. The human felt heat radiating from its body, a mix of pain and raw power. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to speak. I can help you. I don't know how, but I can." His voice wavered. He did not know if he was lying or hoping, but the words escaped anyway. Suddenly, a loud clank echoed through the chamber. One of the chains snapped slightly, a reminder of the beast's immense strength. The human stumbled backward, heart hammering. The dragons growled louder now, low and resonant, a sound that vibrated through the floor. He could feel it in his bones. The power of these creatures was overwhelming even in their weakened state. "You're afraid," he whispered almost to himself. But then he realized, it was not fear he felt. It was awe, respect. He had stared at monsters before in hollow recordings and reports, but nothing had prepared him for the presence of something alive, intelligent and deadly staring back at him. One of the dragons flexed its claws and the chains rattled again. It was testing him. The human swallowed hard, standing his ground. "I'm not your enemy," he said. His voice was stronger now, steadier. I'm on your side." The golden eyes blinked slowly. The smaller dragon shifted, leaning slightly toward him. Its movements were deliberate, almost hesitant. The human noticed a faint pulse of energy, a spark that seemed to pass from the dragon to him, subtle but undeniable. It was recognition. Suddenly, a loud alarm rang from the chamber's control panel. Red lights flashed. Outside he heard shouting. Soldiers were approaching, armed, likely ready to finish what they had failed to do for days. The dragons stirred again, their chains groaning under the strain. One of them bared a row of sharp teeth, not in aggression at him, but as a warning to anyone else. The human realized, with a mix of fear and determination, that he was the dragon's only ally. Everyone else had tried weapons, traps, and violence and failed. Now it was up to him. Somehow, someway he had to survive and perhaps help them survive too. He stepped forward again, placing his hand lightly against the rough scales of the smaller dragon. Heat radiated from it. A shiver ran up his arm, but he held his ground. The dragon's eyes softened just enough for him to see. The larger dragon shifted its gaze too, golden eyes reflecting a strange trust. In that moment, the human understood something profound. Power alone could not save the dragons. Neither could fear nor force nor weapons. What they needed was something unexpected. Something no one had considered, a choice. And they had chosen him. A whisper of movement outside signaled the soldiers' return. The human looked at the dragons, then back at the door. "We have to move," he said, more to himself than them. But the creature's eyes told him they understood. Even broken, even chained, even on the edge of death, they were waiting for him to act. For the first time, the human felt a surge of purpose. He was small, unarmed, forgotten by the world, but in this moment he was the only one who mattered. And the dragons had decided he mattered too. The alarms blared like a warning siren, echoing through the steel corridors. Red lights flashed across the chamber, casting jagged shadows across the dragon's broken wings and cracked scales. The human's heart raced. He could hear the soldiers shouting, their boots pounding on metal floors, their weapons raised. Something was coming, something fast. A distant roar answered the alarms, a sound that made the hair on his arms stand on end. It wasn't the dragons, it was something else. Something smaller but far more numerous. The human swallowed hard. Reports had spoken of alien predators held in quarantine, vicious creatures bred for speed, agility, and killing. They were kept behind reinforced barriers because even a single one could tear through a team of trained soldiers in minutes. Now the alarms meant they were loose. He looked at the dragons. Their eyes followed the shadows on the floor, alert and calculating. Even weakened, they sensed danger approaching. The larger dragon growled low in its throat, a warning that vibrated through the floor, shaking dust from the ceiling. "They're coming," the human said, voice tight. "The other creatures, they've broken free." The smaller dragon's wings twitched. It shifted slightly, chains rattling against the floor, and its claws scraped the metal. There was a tension in the air, electric and thick. The human could almost feel it pressing against his skin. He realized the dragons were readying themselves, even though they were barely alive. A sudden crash from the corridor made him stumble backward. Shadows darted across the open doorway. The smaller predators were not a single creature, they were a swarm. Hundreds of fast, clawed, snapping jaws and glowing eyes. The soldiers outside fired indiscriminately, their shots echoing like cannon fire, but the creatures were too quick. The human pressed himself against the wall, watching as one predator leaped onto a console and sent sparks flying. Another crashed into a reinforced door, shaking it violently. Panic rippled through the soldiers' ranks. He knew that if the dragons did not act soon, the chamber would be overrun and they all would die. "Look at me," the human said, his voice firm despite the fear curling in his stomach. "We fight together. Trust me." The dragon's eyes locked on him. There was understanding there, something unspoken yet undeniable. The smaller dragon shifted, muscles flexing beneath cracked scales. The larger one bared its teeth, a low rumble vibrating through the floor as it flexed its wings, testing the limits of its chains. The human glanced at the chains holding them. He knew they could not move freely, but he also knew desperation could create strength. "We have to get through this," he whispered, more to himself than anyone else. "I'll find a way." A loud crash split the corridor wall as one of the alien predators smashed through reinforced plating. Sparks flew, smoke curled into the chamber, and the human stumbled. A soldier screamed as a predator lunged, tearing through armor and metal. The dragons reacted immediately. Even bound, the larger dragon lunged forward, its chains stretching, claws scraping sparks off the floor. Its growl was deafening, sending the smaller predators skittering back, wary of the force. The smaller dragon joined, slamming its weight against the floor and snapping its jaws at the advancing swarm. It was not fast enough to free itself entirely, but the predators hesitated. The human realized, with a mix of awe and fear, that even chained, the dragons could hold their own. "They listen to you," a soldier shouted, pointing at the human, disbelief in his voice. How are you controlling them?" The human didn't answer. He didn't have an answer. All he knew was that the dragons had chosen him, and that choice was now their only advantage. He took a step closer to the larger dragon. "We need a path," he said, voice steady. "I'll guide you." The dragon's eyes flicked toward the corridor, then back at him, golden and glowing. Slowly, with chains rattling and wings straining, it moved toward the wall, pressing against it, testing the limits. The smaller dragon mirrored the movement. The human's pulse raced. If they could break a section of the wall, even just enough to create an escape route, they could survive. Another predator lunged through a side hatch, snapping jaws at the human. He dodged, rolling across the floor, and slammed his shoulder into a control panel. Sparks flew, and a door segment swung open slightly. The dragons roared simultaneously, a sound that shook the walls. The alien predators froze for a split second, startled by the combined force. This is our chance," the human shouted. He ran toward the dragons, placing his hands on their massive heads, speaking softly. "Push, now." With a deafening crack, the chains groaned and snapped partially. The larger dragon lunged against the broken wall, the smaller following. Dust and sparks filled the air. The predators hesitated, confused by the sudden move. The human felt a surge of adrenaline. They were alive. They had a way out, barely but alive. As the chamber shook and the alarms blared, the human realized something profound. He had been forgotten by everyone else, left behind in a room full of death. But here, in the chaos, with 2 dragon-class creatures now following his lead, he was indispensable. And for the first time he understood the truth of survival in this unforgiving universe. Courage, trust, and choice mattered more than strength alone. The human's lungs burned as he pushed forward, guiding the dragons through the fractured wall. Dust and sparks filled the air, and the alarms screamed in a deafening chorus. Behind them, the alien predators skittered and snapped, relentless in their pursuit, but hesitant against the dragon's raw power. The human's heart pounded, not with fear this time but with a strange determination. The larger dragon shifted, its chains dragging across the floor, wings scraping the walls. The human felt the vibrations in his chest as it moved, each step a warning and a promise. The smaller dragon leaned closer, brushing against him lightly as if seeking reassurance. Their awareness was extraordinary. He had never experienced such intelligence in any creature before, and the connection was almost overwhelming. "They're listening," the human muttered. His voice trembled slightly but he kept moving. "We can do this, together." A loud crack echoed from the corridor. One of the soldiers outside had fired a concentrated energy blast. Sparks flew across the floor, bouncing dangerously close to the dragon's claws. The human ducked instinctively, holding his breath. One predator hissed and leaped toward the human, jaws snapping. The smaller dragon reacted instantly, snapping its massive jaws in midair and sending the creature sprawling into a wall. The human blinked, amazed. They weren't just following him, they were protecting him. The larger dragon's golden eyes found him again. It shifted closer to the broken wall, testing its strength. Dust fell from the ceiling, and a faint tremor ran through the chamber. "We have to move faster," he whispered, voice tight. "They're too fast and we can't keep holding them off forever." From the shadows of the corridor, more predators appeared, faster than before. They had learned. Each movement of the dragons was being watched, analyzed, and countered. The human realized that brute strength alone would not save them. They needed strategy. And somehow he was the one thinking of it. He looked at the dragons, eyes wide. "We need a trap. Lead them where we want, not where they want," he said, his voice firmer now. The dragons tilted their heads, golden eyes following his gestures. The human could almost feel their understanding, as if the thought itself had crossed the boundaries of species. He darted toward a section of the chamber floor, pointing at a weakened support beam. "When they follow, we collapse it. Make it slow them down." His hands shook but his mind raced. "You two, follow my lead. Trust me." The larger dragon growled low in agreement, muscles coiling beneath cracked scales. The smaller dragon shifted closer to him, brushing lightly against his arm, and the human felt a surge of courage. It wasn't just instinct that bound them, it was a choice, a shared will. Suddenly, one predator lunged from the shadows, teeth snapping inches from his face. He stumbled backward, heart hammering. The smaller dragon reacted immediately, knocking it aside with a single swipe of its massive claw. Sparks flew, metal groaned, and the human barely kept his footing. "Good, good," he shouted, voice echoing in the chaos. "Keep them back." He sprinted toward the weakened beam, signaling the dragons to follow. The larger one pressed against it, testing its weight. Dust fell from the ceiling and a loud crack rang out. "Now!" the human yelled. With a roar, both dragons surged forward, and the beam collapsed, creating a barrier between them and the pursuing predators. Rocks and debris tumbled, slowing the attackers and giving the human and the dragons a momentary reprieve. Panting, he looked up at the dragons. "We did it," he whispered, more in awe than relief. The creatures flexed their claws and wings, bruised and bleeding but still alive. Their eyes met his again, golden and intelligent. He could see it, the recognition, the acceptance, the trust that had formed in the chaos. Then another sound came, cold and metallic. Soldiers returning, not with weapons but with orders. Reinforcements, human and armed, were moving in. The human froze. These were not here to help. They had been told the dragons were dangerous beyond control. They would see him as a threat now, the one who had led the beast this far. "They'll attack," he said, voice tight, heart hammering. "We have no time. You, follow me." The dragons shifted, chains rattling, but did not hesitate. The human led them toward a narrow corridor, using walls and debris as cover. Predators scrambled around the fallen beam, snarling, but the dragons used their weight and presence to keep a clear path open. Every step was tense, every second dangerous, yet the human moved with a growing confidence. As they neared the exit, he glanced over his shoulder. One predator lunged from the shadows, but the larger dragon spun, claws flashing, catching it midair. The human's heart leapt and he whispered almost in disbelief, You saved me." The dragons growled low, acknowledging him with a subtle nod of their heads. He realized that the bond between them was no longer just survival, it was alliance. They were fighting for each other now. Not because of chains or orders or fear, but because they had chosen to trust him. The human's breath came in ragged gasps. Dust and sparks filled the corridor, alarms still blaring, but for the first time he felt like they could survive. Against predators, against chaos, against impossible odds, the human and the dragons were no longer alone. They were a team. And together they could face whatever was waiting beyond the chamber doors. The corridor was narrow, dim, and vibrating with tension. Dust hung in the air like smoke, and sparks from shattered panels flickered against the walls. The human ran, leading the dragons, chains rattling behind them. The predators from before had been slowed, but they were not defeated. Every instinct screamed that danger was closing in from every side. "Keep moving," the human shouted. His lungs burned, sweat stinging his eyes. He glanced at the dragons, watching the larger one's wings twitch under the strain of the chains, the smaller one's claws leaving scratches across the floor as it followed him faithfully. They were alive because of him. That thought bolstered his courage. Then a voice cut through the chaos, a voice sharp, commanding, and familiar. "Stop right there." The human froze. Soldiers appeared around a corner, weapons raised, eyes wide. But these were not the same soldiers who had left him behind. These were elite operatives, loyal only to orders, believing the dragons were uncontrollable, a threat that must be eliminated. "No," he shouted. "Wait. They won't attack if you don't." A surge of energy blasts erupted from their weapons, aimed at the dragons. Sparks flew as the bolts ricocheted off walls, some striking near the creature's claws. The larger dragon roared, straining against its chains, teeth bared. The smaller dragon hissed, flexing its wings as if preparing to leap. The human ran forward, arms raised. "Stop. You don't understand. They're with me." A soldier sneered, voice cold. "With you? You're just a human. They are monsters, and you're lucky they haven't torn you apart already. Step aside or you'll die with them." The human's chest tightened. His hands shook, but his mind raced. The dragon's eyes met his. They had trusted him. They had chosen him. He would not abandon them. "Stay behind me," he whispered, voice steady. "I'll get us out." He darted between the soldiers and the dragons, positioning himself so the creature's focus remained on him. The larger dragon's tail whipped, knocking a soldier backward. Sparks flew from broken panels as the smaller dragon flexed, claws scraping the metal floor ready to strike. A soldier lunged at the human, attempting to grab him. The smaller dragon reacted instinctively, snapping its massive jaws and forcing the attacker back. The human stumbled but regained balance. His heart raced, fear and determination mingling. "They're not your enemies," he shouted. "We can survive together." But the soldiers did not listen. More advanced weapons fired, and the chamber shook with the impact. The human ducked as debris fell around him. The dragon's movements became restricted as the chains caught against the walls, their strength waning under constant assault. Every second felt like a lifetime. Then from the shadows a familiar voice called again. "I warned you about trusting humans," a commander barked. "We cannot allow this alliance to continue. Kill the human. Kill the beasts." The human's stomach dropped. He realized the betrayal was complete. He had believed that survival depended on courage and trust. But some humans were driven by fear, by orders, and by the desire to control what they did not understand. The larger dragon bellowed, straining against its chains as the human raised his hands. "We fight together or we die together. I won't let them hurt you." His voice shook, but he stood his ground. One of the soldiers aimed directly at him. The human's eyes met the dragon's. In that instant, unspoken understanding passed between them. The smaller dragon lunged, knocking the weapon aside, teeth flashing, claws extended. Sparks and smoke filled the corridor. The human felt the heat of the dragon's breath on his face as it protected him. The larger dragon's roar echoed through the walls, vibrating the metal. It twisted against the chains, knocking two soldiers off their feet. The human scrambled to their side, helping him steady the beasts. Every move was tense, every second dangerous, yet he could feel their trust in him as clearly as his own heartbeat. He grabbed a loose panel from the wall and threw it toward a group of advancing soldiers. The clang of metal distracted them, buying precious seconds. The dragons lunged forward in unison, straining against the chains, teeth and claws tearing into metal and machinery. The human shouted, voice raw, "Move! Follow me!" The betrayal cut deep. He had believed in humanity as much as he had believed in the dragons, and now both sides were colliding in chaos. Yet through the smoke, the dragon's golden eyes met his. Their loyalty was absolute. In that moment he understood the truth. Some bonds were stronger than fear, stronger than orders, stronger than death itself. Debris fell around them. Sparks rained down as the dragon's movements loosened the chains. The human pressed himself against the larger dragon's shoulder, guiding it toward a partially open exit. The smaller dragon followed, moving with him, protective and fierce. Behind them, soldiers hesitated, unsure how to respond to the creature's raw power combined with the human's determination. "We're not safe yet," the human muttered, heart pounding, sweat running down his face. "But we won't die here, not like this." The dragons roared in agreement, a sound that filled the corridor with authority. The human realized that betrayal had forged something unexpected. A bond stronger than fear, a team bound by trust and choice, standing against both the alien predators and the humans who had turned on them. Together they pushed forward, chains rattling, claws scraping, breath shallow but hearts fierce. Survival was no longer just about running, it was about defiance. And the human, forgotten and unarmed, had become the catalyst for a force no one could control. The chamber beyond the corridor was open, but filled with jagged debris and smoke. Red alarms still blared, casting harsh light across broken machinery and scorched walls. The human's chest heaved, lungs burning, sweat streaking his dirt-smeared face. He looked at the dragons. Chains hung from their limbs, scales cracked, wings torn, but their golden eyes glowed with unwavering focus. They were still alive, and he was still alive. "We have to reach the exit," he said, voice steady despite the chaos. "Follow me and don't hesitate." The larger dragon growled low, its tail sweeping a fallen panel across the floor. Sparks flew as the metal scraped against the walls, knocking several predators back. The smaller dragon shifted closer to him, brushing against his shoulder, protective and tense. Each step was dangerous, each breath a gamble. Suddenly, a loud rumble shook the ground. The walls around the chamber quivered and dust rained down. Somewhere deep in the complex, a massive containment unit had collapsed. From the shadows emerged new predators, larger, faster, and more aggressive than any they had faced before. Their jaws glimmered with deadly teeth, claws scraping the metal like knives. The human's stomach tightened, but he did not flinch. "We're not running," he shouted. "We survive, together." The dragons moved instinctively. The larger one swung its massive claws, tearing through debris and striking the nearest predator. The smaller dragon leaped with incredible precision, snapping its jaws at another, forcing it to retreat. Sparks and smoke filled the air, but the human did not stop. He ran between them, guiding their movements, shouting directions with a clarity that defied his exhaustion. "Left. Push them back," he yelled. The larger dragon pivoted, tail lashing, while the smaller one pressed forward. The predators hissed, momentarily confused by the coordination. The human felt a surge of awe and adrenaline. They were a team, a human and two dragon-class creatures, fighting side by side against impossible odds. A loud crash echoed from behind them. More soldiers had arrived, weapons blazing, determined to finish what they had started. The human froze for a split second. "No, don't attack. They're with me," he shouted, waving his arms. The dragons reacted instantly. The larger one roared, chains rattling violently, its sheer presence forcing the soldiers to hesitate. The smaller dragon's claws scraped sparks from the floor as it blocked a charging soldier, jaws snapping dangerously close. The human's heart pounded. He realized then that even humans, driven by fear and orders, could be as dangerous as predators. He ducked behind the larger dragon, speaking quickly. "We can't fight them all. We need a path." The dragon's eyes followed his every motion. The smaller dragon nudged him forward, almost urging him to act. A pile of rubble lay near the far wall, jagged metal and broken panels stacked haphazardly. The human seized an idea. "We push this," he said, gripping the debris with all his strength. "It'll block the entrance and slow them down." The larger dragon pressed against it with its massive shoulders, chains stretching and groaning under the strain. The smaller one joined, claws digging into metal, teeth gripping shards. Together, human and dragons forced the rubble into place. A massive crash filled the chamber as the pile toppled, blocking part of the corridor. The predators were slowed, giving them precious seconds. The human felt his chest tighten, sweat and blood mixing on his face, but he pressed forward. Almost there. Keep moving. They reached a partially open exit, the faint glow of the outside world visible beyond. He glanced back. The dragon's chains had caught on debris, restricting some movement, but they strained forward, unwavering. The predators and soldiers hesitated at the threshold, unsure how to proceed against creatures this strong coordinated with a human. The human took a deep breath and ran toward the exit, signaling the dragons to follow. The larger one lurched forward, wings scraping against the ceiling, chains rattling. The smaller one leaped in perfect sync behind him. Dust and sparks exploded as they pressed through, the world outside waiting like a promise of freedom. The sunlight hit his face as they emerged. Fresh air rushed into their lungs, the roar of distant alarms fading behind them. The human stumbled, falling to his knees, but he was alive. The dragons followed, shaking off debris, wings flexing as though to stretch after a long struggle. Their eyes met his once more, golden and intelligent, filled with a silent understanding. They had survived because of each other. For a moment nothing moved. The predators hesitated at the edge of the exit, growling, but the dragon's presence was enough. The human sat back, chest heaving, staring at them. "We made it," he whispered, almost in disbelief. "We actually made it." The larger dragon lowered its head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement. The smaller one nudged him gently, almost protective. He realized then that the bond they had formed was not just about survival, it was about choice, loyalty, and trust. They had looked to him at the edge of death, and he had led them through chaos, betrayal, and unimaginable threats. Around them, the world was quiet for the first time in hours. The human rose to his feet, brushing dirt from his clothes, heart still pounding but steady. He glanced at the dragons, golden eyes shimmering in the sunlight. "We'll survive," he said, voice firm, "and we'll face whatever comes next, together." The dragons rumbled low in agreement, and the human knew it was true. At the edge of death, two chained dragon-class creatures had found hope in a human. And in that moment, forgotten and unarmed, he had become their only lifeline. The sun rose higher, casting light across broken corridors and shattered walls. The human, breathing heavily, looked ahead. Survival was not guaranteed, but for the first time he felt invincible, not because of weapons or numbers or strength, but because he was not alone. Together they stepped into the unknown.